Jesus took Peter, James, and John, his brother, and led them up high on a mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became white as light. And behold, Moses and Elijah appeared to them, conversing with Jesus. Then Peter said to Jesus in reply, Lord, it is good that we are here. If you wish, I will make 3 tents, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. While he was still speaking, behold, a bright cloud cast a shadow over them. Then from the cloud came a voice that said, This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him. When the disciples heard this, they fell prostrate and were very much afraid. But Jesus came and touched them, saying, Rise and do not be afraid. And when the disciples raised their eyes, they saw no one else but Jesus alone. As they were coming down from the mountain, Jesus charged them, Do not tell the vision to anyone until the Son of Man has been raised from the dead. These are the words of our brother Jesus. Praise to you, Jesus Christ. I went on a pilgrimage to Italy once, and we visited Assisi. Greta, you should go sometime, Greta. We visited Assisi in the home of St. Francis and the many places where he went to get away, to be alone with nature and to connect with God. One place was a crevice high up on a mountain, where it is told that St. Francis often slept, the Sacro Monte della Verna. We hear a lot about mountains in the scriptures, don't we? In Isaiah, we read, Though the mountains may fall and the hills turn to dust, yet the love of the Lord will stand. And how beautiful on the mountains are the feet of those who bring good news. And in our gospel reading today, Jesus led his friends to a high mountain where he was transfigured. In ancient Israel's imagination, the mountains were where the heavenly realm and the skies met with the human realm on the land. In this place, people can access God's wisdom and power and God's very presence. If you've ever stood on the peak of a mountain, you can certainly understand why. Not only does it give you that sense of literally being on top of the world, but it gives you a bird's eye view of the valley below. So it makes perfect sense that Jesus, who often escaped to barren places after being in and among the crowds, took this break on the top of a mountain. And there he encountered God, who said again, This is my Son, with whom I'm well pleased. Listen to him. Notice that Jesus was transfigured. In other words, this encounter with God, with Moses and Elijah, it changed his very presence. It visibly changed him. He wasn't just transformed, but he appeared in a radiant, luminous, divine state. We talk a lot about transformation. In our Eucharistic prayers, we ask God to transform us just as these elements of bread and wine are transformed into the body and blood of Christ. When we are transformed, we benefit, we change, we grow. The essence of who we are is different, more mature. It's a process that we participate in. Perhaps we recognize how we need to be more aligned with the heart of God. We seek the things of God. The essence of our being becomes more compassionate, more merciful, more loving. When we are transfigured, there's a substantial difference in how we look. It's a supernatural shift in our appearance, our physicality. What becomes evident to others isn't the way we've grown, What others see is God, presence of God in that moment. Do others see God in us? Are there moments when perhaps the hardness of our expressions, maybe the cynical tones in our voices, the defensive postures that we take, melt away and we become different than how we usually present? Being transfigured requires two things. It requires us to be where God can shine through us on our own mountaintops, if you will, and to be open and available to God. It's a moment of pure goodness, as much for the sake of those who witness it as it is for us. The sacraments are a wonderful way to witness the transfiguration of someone, moments when we experience the pure goodness of God. I remember when we attended the baptism of our godson, Eric, Father Guido from St. Mary's poured the water on his little head, and his parents beamed in pride. All of us united in joy as this child was welcomed into the church. Little Eric was indeed transfigured, glowing with the love of God and the love of his community. In that moment, we were all aware of God's anointing of this baby as his beloved son. Jesus heard God exclaim, "This is my beloved son in whom I'm well pleased," as he stood on the banks of the Jordan River. And again, "This is my beloved son," listen to him on the mountaintop that day. What child doesn't transfigure or glow when basking in the pride of his parents? Anne Lamott recalls a time when she witnessed a transfiguration of sorts at her church. She refers to the moment as a genuine miracle. She writes, "One of our members, a man named Ken, was dying of AIDS, disintegrating before our very eyes. Shortly after Ken joined the church, his partner died of the disease. Ken, who wasn't a believer when he first started attending, shared with the congregation that right after his partner Brandon died, Jesus had slid into the hole in his heart that Brandon's loss left. Now, there was a woman in the choir at Anne Lamott's church named Renola. She was large and beautiful and jovial and black and as devout as could be. But she'd been standoffish with Ken. She'd look at him sideways as if she wouldn't have to quite see him if she didn't look at him head on. Given the way in which Renola was raised, she thought of Ken's lifestyle as an abomination. And she was even maybe a little bit afraid catching the disease. But Ken came to church almost every week until he couldn't, getting too weak to leave his home. As Anne Lamott says, he weighed almost no pounds, his face lopsided as if he'd had a stroke. When he did return, he talked joyously about his life and his decline, grace and redemption, of how safe and happy he felt. Now, on this particular Sunday, for the first hymn, the congregation sang Jacob's Ladder. Ken couldn't stand to sing, but he joined with his hymnal on his lap. When the congregation sang His eyes are on the sparrow, the whole congregation rose, with only Ken remaining seated. They sang, "Why should I feel discouraged? Why do the shadows fall?" Renola watched Ken rather skeptically for a moment, and then her face began to melt and contort like his. And she went to his side and bent down to lift him up. She lifted this white rag doll, this scarecrow, and she held him next to her. She draped him over and against her like a child, and they sang. Anne said, "It pierced me." Maybe because music is about as physical as it gets. Your essential rhythm is your heartbeat, your essential sound, the breath. We are walking temples of noise, and when you add tender hearts to this mix, it somehow lets us meet in places that we can't get to any other way. In that moment, Ken and Manola were on a mountaintop, and they were transfigured. Transfiguration might last for a moment or longer, but at some point we have to come down from the mountaintop. Immediately before Jesus took Peter, James, and John up the mountain, he told them and the others that he must suffer, die, and be resurrected on the third day. He told them again after they came down from the mountain. It was a reality check, like with Ken. At some point, Ken, like his partner, would succumb to this horrible disease and die. Coming down to the valley where real life hits us can be hard. Have you ever returned from a wonderful retreat to be hit in the face with the same dreadful situations that you left behind? How often do we ask ourselves how we might take that glorious retreat experience into our daily lives and maintain it? It was the same for Jesus, for his disciples. So how did this experience gird them for what was to come? How can moments of transfiguration strengthen our capacity to cope with the stress of our lives, with hardships and suffering? Well, here's some takeaways from our gospel reading. First, know your own belovedness. One of the ways in which we are transfigured is in those moments when we become innately aware of our own belovedness, God's affirmation of each of us just as we are. It shifts something in us. It's where we meet God. Brian Massengale, a Black and openly gay priest who has faced terrible persecution from the church for both of these divinely created parts of himself, shared in an interview with Father James Martin recently that he is an avid journaler. And he finds journaling very helpful in taking an honest look at himself. Father Martin asked him, "Where do you find God in all of that?" And Father Massengale responded, "I deeply believe that when I become centered in the reality of who I am, all of who I am, that is where I encounter God." Secondly, we can learn to identify the voice of Jesus as we carry our own crosses. We can heed those words, listen to him. Commentator Michael Marsh says, "One of the things I'm aware of in the midst of challenge is how many voices begin to speak. Some are outside of me and some are within me. They're voices of commentators chattering about what's happening and what should be done. Voices of judgment, voices of second guessing, voices of fear, and all the would-have, should-haves, could-haves. Not every voice is helpful, and not every voice is God. God is saying when you're struggling, when life gets hard, come back to the words of Jesus. How do those voices you are hearing compare to the words of Jesus? For sheep know the sound of the shepherd's voice. Come back to Jesus, his teachings, his examples, his promise to lead us. Jesus told Peter, James, and John as they witnessed the transfiguration to get up. The three disciples fell to the ground and were overcome with fear. Jesus touched them and said, "Get up." But it's more than just to get up. A more literal translation would be something like be raised up. Be aroused from the sleep of death, or maybe even be resurrected. The word Matthew uses here is the same verb he uses when Jesus heals the paralytic, telling him, stand up. When Jesus takes the hand of the dead daughter of the synagogue leader, and the girl got up. It's the same word Jesus uses to foretell his own resurrection, and the word the angel uses when he tells the women who came to the tomb of Jesus, he's not here, for he's been raised up, just as he said. Whatever knocks us to the ground, whatever astounds us is a moment of transfiguration. It's not meant to keep us down, but to infuse us with life so we can get back to the purpose for which we were created. We are meant to rise from that moment, to pick up our mats and walk. Finally, Jesus said to his disciples, do not be afraid. Most of us live with some level of fear of getting hurt, a fear of losing what we love. And sometimes it's even the fear that comes with getting what we want, like a holy encounter with God. Something so supernatural that it defies any explanation. It could scare the living daylights out of us. When Jesus says, do not be afraid, he's speaking to the heart of the human condition. His words do not magically eliminate our fears. Instead, they are a call to take a first step into a new and changed life despite the fear. The story of the Transfiguration is about opening our eyes to glory wherever we find it, to allowing that glory to alter us, and to becoming willing to walk where it leads us. Ilia Delio tells a story from the Desert Fathers about giving oneself wholly to God. She writes, Abba Lot went to see Abba Joseph and said to him, Abba, as far as I can tell, I fast a little, pray and meditate. I live in peace. And as far as I can, I purify my thoughts. What else can I do? Then the old man stood up and stretched his hands towards heaven. His fingers became like 10 lamps of fire. And he said to him, if you will, you can become all flame. If you will. It's a scary thing to be transfigured, isn't it? Beloved, let us listen, rise up, and move past our fears.